Couple of really interesting stories developing out of Canada. Yes, the Trudeau government is now being sued for the suspension of Parliament, and at the same time, Liberals in Canada are trying to figure out how to deal with the incoming Trump administration and the tariffs which are about to hit. President Trump doubling down on his position on these tariffs in Canada. Take a listen.
But we don't need anything. We don't need their fuel. We don't need their energy. We don't need their oil and gas. We don't need anything that they have. And I said to Trudeau, I said, why are we subsidizing you $200 and $250 billion a year? He said, I really don't know. And I said, well, I don't know either. I said, what would happen to Canada if we didn't? He said, Canada would be obliterated if that happened. I said, then Canada should be a 51st state.
Well, David Creighton joins us now from Ottawa, Canada, as all of the hand-wringing up there continues. David, good to see you.
Nice to be back, Clayton.
So let's start with the suing of the government right now, and Trudeau government being sued over the suspension of Parliament. Then we'll get to Trump's piece of this in a second. What's going on here?
Yeah, it started with a couple of folks from Nova Scotia who reached out to the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. And I've dealt with this group in the past, largely over censorship bills. They do a lot of excellent work on behalf of Canadians who just need some legal assistance, or Canadians who are trying to make the government accountable. So they've taken on this case, and I talked to their lead attorney just yesterday morning, actually, James Manson, who's taken on this case. And he said that they've got a very good chance of the Supreme Court of Canada intervening in this prorogation, this suspension of Parliament, on the basis that it's not just inappropriate, but unconstitutional. And he bases this on a case in the UK in 2019 where Boris Johnson attempted to prorogue the Parliament there based on the fact that it was just the expedient thing to do at the time. He just felt it was politically necessary. And the Supreme Court of the UK came back and said, that's not why you prorogue. You can't do it for partisan reasons. So there's a definite legal precedent here, not necessarily in Canada, but in the Commonwealth, in the Westminster system of Parliament. And Manson was telling me he thinks they've got a very good chance of getting this prorogation canceled and getting right back to where things were before Justin Trudeau decided he was going to suspend Parliament, because it was time for, he used that word again, reset. And so this is creating some sense of optimism that there might be a way out of this quagmire, because right now the House is not resuming sitting until March 24th. And I also asked the center yesterday, do you think Trudeau could prorogue again, just to avoid a non-confidence vote, just to avoid the government falling? And he said, glad you asked that question, because I don't think so, because they can't keep the House going indefinitely without a spending bill. So Parliament would be in the same position as Congress is every year, where this fiscal wall is there, and they have to do something about keeping the bills paid. So I was very enthused to hear that yesterday. So either the prorogation will end, or they'll come back in March and there will be a non-confidence motion within days. They cannot do it again. It would just be fiscally impossible.
So you sort of answered my question. I thought, well, legally, I mean, what would happen next, right? So we'd come back and there would be this non-confidence vote for Trudeau. This is something he was trying to avoid, having his government collapse. So this was a strategy to avoid having his government collapse. He then resigned as sort of a preemptive measure in all of this. So if this goes forward, Parliament would come back, they would have a non-confidence vote, and you think he would be removed from office?
No, there's no question about it now. I cannot see any opposition party supporting the Liberal government at this point. And of course, the Liberal leadership race is supposed to be all finished by March the 9th. I find this incomprehensible. We've never had a leadership race that quickly. It's like going through the primary system in the United States within a month. It's impossible. Right. I don't know how they intend to do it. But the thing is, every day now we have these prominent Liberals, largely from the Trudeau cabinet, dropping out of the race. We just had Yesterday we had two drop out. We had Luke Champagne drop out today. Christy Clark, a former Premier of British Columbia, dropped out today as well. So we're down basically the only two prominent people who haven't even declared yet, and that's Chrystia Freeland, the former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, and carbon tax Mark Carney, who the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the governor of the Bank of England, who has been, of course, the free spirit for the United Nations Climate Change Initiative for the past 3 years. And he's just been waiting to come back. God only knows why he would want the Liberal leadership right now, except to be prime minister for maybe a month, because there's no way, if you look at the polling, the Liberals can reverse things by just changing leaders. They're doing as well, if not worse, under any new leader, meaning they're still 25 plus points behind Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. There's really nothing they can do. There's nobody out there who is going to magically reverse the fortunes of the Liberal Party. And I don't know why Mark Carney would even want the job. He seems to be relatively intelligent in a very sinister way, mind you, but I don't know why he'd want the job.
The other big story, of course, is Trump's tariffs. He doubled down in this press conference just the other day on what he plans to do with Canada, talked about Governor Trudeau once again, saying, why are we subsidizing Canada hundreds of billions of dollars? And Trudeau couldn't answer it. And he said, well, you might as well become the 51st state if you can't answer that question. So there's some weird messaging coming out now from the Trudeau administration and the Liberal cabinet minister on how to deal with Trump's tariffs. So they come in, he's the president of the United States on January 20th, and they won't even have a parliament. So what is this weird messaging coming out of Canada about Trump's tariffs?
Well, Trudeau has been doing a series of interviews in the U.S. He was on CNN with Jake Tapper the other day. He was with Jen Psaki, of all people, on MSNBC on Saturday. And the message was the same. We're not going to do much in terms of counter tariffs. And I had to listen to it twice. I said, did I hear that right? And Trudeau said, we're going to put tariffs on bourbon and playing cards. I thought, well, that's going to put a real dent into those Sunday afternoon poker games, isn't it? But
right,
that's the plan from Trudeau. And, he's still the prime minister, and he's still the one who's supposed to be the primary spokesperson for the government of Canada. And this is what he's telling the U.S. media, mind, who are probably listening, and Donald Trump's probably having a great laugh over this. But Trudeau also says, we've done everything we can about border security. And of course, that is a complete fallacy. Well, all they've done is promise to spend $1.3 billion over 6 years. And that's not what Donald Trump is looking for. That's not what Canadians should be looking for. So that's not exactly working. But meanwhile, his cabinet ministers are going out and saying, we're going to embargo all Canadian energy. And the problem with that is they can't say that. Now, Melanie Joly, there are very insouciant foreign affairs minister, is out there saying, yes, that's on the table. Either we're going to have a tariff on the energy or we're going to embargo energy to the U.S. It can't happen because energy in Canada is a provincial jurisdiction. So what they're pointing their finger at Alberta, of course, where most of the oil and gas is, and that most of the oil and gas is going to the States. And they're saying Alberta is going to do this. And Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, said yesterday, no way. We're not going to do this. We're not going to cut off oil and gas to the United States. She was down at Mar-a-Lago on the weekend discussing this with Donald Trump. The Premier of Alberta right now is, I said this morning, the de facto Prime Minister of Canada. She's the only one out there actually trying to negotiate with Donald Trump, actually trying to find a solution and saying, no, we can't cut off oil and gas to the United States. If we did that, we'd also be cutting off oil and gas to Ontario and Quebec because it comes from the same pipeline. Oh, but the Liberal government hasn't even thought this through. They're not even thinking about this. And I just have to say, if Trudeau didn't know what Trump was referring to with the $200 billion trade deficit, well, the reason there's a trade deficit, it's because of the oil and gas. If you take the energy out of the component, Canada has a trade deficit with the United States. It's the oil and gas that makes up this $200 billion trade deficit. And if Justin Trudeau didn't know that, it's absolutely frightening. He doesn't understand that much of energy policy. Danielle Smith explained that to Canadians yesterday. She said, this is what Donald Trump's talking about. We talked about this on the weekend at Mar-a-Lago. And I think he was reasonably satisfied that this is a solution. We can get a solution to this problem. But as I said, the real prime minister right now is the premier of Alberta. She's doing constructive work. She's doing something that Justin Trudeau is not doing, and talking about a tariff on bourbon playing cards and suggesting the border is just great now. And once again, reaching out to the left-wing media in the United States, where he knows he still has friends, because he doesn't have very many friends in the left-wing media in Canada anymore. So he's not, and whenever he's desperate, he goes down to New York and Washington, and he does his bit there with the late night talk shows or with the daytime cable news that he's popular
Maybe
with.
I know, it seems like he's like angling for a job, like you go down to MSNBC, that's like what Jen Psaki did so she could get a job after she left the Biden administration. I mean, no one watches any of these shows anyway. So I don't know who he's preaching to. He's preaching to the choir of the few 100,000 people that still watch MSNBC, the brain dead people that still watch CNN and MSNBC. I mean, you talk about the whiskey, the bourbon whiskey, the Canadian whiskey. The United States only imports about $1 billion. I mean, I know only $1 billion, but really only about $1 billion worth of Canadian whiskey into the United States. I think we'll live without Canadian whiskey and playing cards. I think we've got enough Tennessee whiskey we can prop up the economy with.
Well,
what do we do without these playing cards? Oh my gosh,
it's very bizarre. But talking about the U.S. media that nobody watches. Mark Carney, of course, who is the front runner. This is the guy who the Liberals think is going to save their party. He was down on the Jon Stewart show last night talking about how the Liberal Party can still be saved. He did everything except announce his candidacy on the show last night. And of course was feted and applauded by the audience. Here's this great globalist who's going to save Canada. He's in the same boat as the WEF. He addresses them every year. He's just like Justin Trudeau. The crowd couldn't get enough of him. But he's going to the U.S. on the Jon Stewart show to effectively announce his candidacy for the next leader of the Liberal Party. I find this very bizarre. But that's the way these people are thinking right now. They are thinking in their own little bubbles, and they don't like to think out of the bubble anymore.
No, they want to talk to their donors because they're not talking to real human beings. No real human being is watching CNN or MSNBC. It's the part of the donor class in Washington where they want to hope they maybe can get some money from some donors and line things up in Canada. Oh, well, I don't know what I'm going to do without my playing cards, my Canadian playing cards. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. Might have my 8-year-old just draw some on some paper and chop them up because I don't know what I'm going to do. It's a terrifying prospect. David Clayton, great to see you. Thank you for keeping them honest up there in Canada. And I asked you a few weeks ago here on the show, after Trudeau resigned, would there be any legal recourse here? And it seems like this could be the move that brings the Parliament back. And the legal moves here.
I think it could. And as I said, one way or the other, Trudeau has put himself into a box he can't get out of right now. He's in a corner he can no longer escape from. And the sooner we have elections and elect a legitimate government, a valid government, the better for everybody so we can get on with negotiations. In the meantime, thank God we have a very astute premier in Alberta who has taken on the job by herself because nobody else is doing it.
Well, your country doesn't have a leader, neither does my country at the moment. So, David, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us as always.
Thank you so much, Clayton.